Thank everybody for joining so far. We'll get started here in a few minutes once we let some more people get signed on here. Okay, for everybody on, we've officially hit 1 o'clock. I'm going to give about 2 minutes to let any late arrivals join. We'll go ahead and get started. So here about 1:02, I'll just kick things off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Garth.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's enough sitting in silence for now. We'll go ahead and get things kicked off here. Want to do first, thank you all for joining us here on our joint webinar with Aparavi and Wasabi. General topic we'll be covering today are data breaches and storage costs. I don't have to probably state that this is two of the biggest concerns of almost every company out there, and we will go ahead and address how Aparavi and Wasabi can help increase efficiencies and tackle the subject here of unprecedented data growth and storage costs here and security risks as well. I'll be your host for the event here. My name is Garth Simple with Aparavi. I am a platform specialist. Also with Aparavi, we have Dan Weissig, our platform architect. And then presenting for Wasabi, we have David Boland, a VP of Cloud Strategy. So we'll get right into it here for the agenda. We'll start off with an introduction into the Aparavi platform and its capabilities. Our platform architect, Dan Weissig, will run you through that. We'll move right into Wasabi service offerings with David Boland. We'll get into Cloud Sync Manager and how they're helping attack the unprecedented data growth and security risks that we're facing today. I will then take over and move into some general information on data breaches, common causes, resolutions. We'll hand that back over to David with Wasabi. We'll go through some more statistics and some interesting information on data growth and what Wasabi is doing to give you the tools to help develop your data strategy in this new age that we're facing here. We'll all tie it together with Aparavi and Wasabi together, how we can help you create the cloud strategy of the future today, help you build better security strategy and help really tackle data growth overall. Then we'll open it up to questions. Feel free to put those in the chat at the end, and myself, Dan, and David will be happy to address those for you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Dan Weissig with Aparavi to go over some platform information and capabilities.
All right, appreciate it, Garth. Thank you. And we'll flip in right on into to Aparavi. So just from a high level, this is kind of the what we call the Aparavi cockpit. This is the interface that we're going to be talking about today, and what Aparavi can do from a high level. What we like to talk about with our data intelligence and automation platform is being able to view and understand all the unstructured data on-premise as well as in the cloud that you may not have a full insight into what's out there, what type of potential breaches you might have vulnerabilities to, as well as kind of where your footprint is of all the unstructured data. So what Aparavi does is we take a look at a couple different layers of scans and operations that we can do. First off, we start with kind of basic infrastructure scan, and then we can also go into what we call the content signature, where we fully understand what the data is, where it resides, and what's also understanding the data. So we can identify redundancies, obsolete and trivial data within the environment, and then help you kind of clean up the data footprint within the environment. So if we can look at particular two different files, for example, we can see those across multiple different folders. We can identify, okay, this is a redundant file. It's just chewing up extra capacity within our platform. And then also look at who the permissions for that file are, who has access to it. And so that also helps build the strategy around the data breach. So if one particular user is hacked, then this other user doesn't have access to that file. That's how we can maybe potentially limit the vulnerabilities for data breaches within the environment. One of the things we can also do is beyond just an infrastructure scan and capturing metadata fields within the files, we can go on into a full-on index as well as a classification for all those files as well. So not only do we look at every single character within the files, we can then look at applying custom classifications. We've got 140 out-of-the-box classifications for those files. We can look at everything from HIPAA to social security numbers to PII, PHI type of data, and apply those classifications, and then, of course, do reporting based upon that. So first thing we like to do is just do that infrastructure scan, kind of clean up the data. So if we know that we've got a massive folder with terabytes of video files, or if we identify that we've got somebody's iTunes library stored out on the corporate network, we're able to identify that. You can start to clean that up before you start messing with indexing and classifications. But then once you do that, once you have that index, once you have that classification, then you can really see an idea of the footprint for the vulnerabilities of this user has access to all the financial records and all of the personal identifiable information within the whole corporate network, and they shouldn't. As well as, okay, we can identify all this extra data of a user that isn't even with the corporation anymore and try and either archive that data off or clean it up. Now, Aparavi does have the ability to move some data around. So if we're moving from a older NAS to a new NAS, going from an older system up to the cloud, we do have the ability to do some of that data migration within the tool directly. So we've got a couple different ways of doing that with regards to a data export, which keeps it in native file format, as well as a data copy, which also allows you to do dedupe compressed as well as encrypted. So if you're going from on-prem to cloud, we don't want to send up everything. Let's just send up the most important data that we need to archive, get it off of our brand new flash array, for example, and just clean up that data. Now, going from cloud to cloud, technically Aparavi does have that functionality. The problem with that is we're kind of external to that cloud, and you would pay a little bit higher egress fees for moving that data. We're just a data mover, but that original cloud would charge you the egress fees to do that. Which is why our friends with Wasabi are on the call with us, and David's going to take over from here, talking about the different approach that we have and the integration that we have with them to help move that data much more efficiently at a much more reasonable cost point. So, David, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so let's jump right in here and talk a little bit about Cloud Sync Manager. But before I do, I'm making the assumption that most people on the webinar are familiar with Wasabi. It's probably a bad assumption, but I'm going to. But so you know what I'll do? I'm going to talk a little bit about Wasabi first. For those of you who may not be familiar with Wasabi, we are a cloud storage company. We offer cloud object storage as a service, infrastructure as a service to customers who would like to store data offsite someplace in a SOC 2 ISO 27001 compliant data center. We have data centers in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, in North America, 2 on the East Coast in Virginia, 1 in Texas, 1 in Oregon. We have a data center in Toronto, and in Asia Pacific region, we have 1 in Singapore, Sydney, and 2 in Japan, 1 Tokyo and 1 Osaka. So we have a worldwide footprint of data centers where people can store their important data offsite. And it's a cloud object storage, so it means that if you're familiar with AWS S3, Azure Blob, Google Cloud Platform object storage, exact same thing. The difference between Wasabi and those folks are we just do storage, and that's all we focus on. We do it very well, and we're a lot less expensive than AWS S3, Azure, or Google. Sometimes 80% less expensive, depending on your configuration. We'll talk about that in a moment. But earlier this year, we introduced a new service called Cloud Sync Manager. And Cloud Sync Manager is a user interface. It's a web-based platform that allows Wasabi customers to do 2 things. 1, you can make a copy of your data in one region and move it to another region. So you can have cross-region replication. Say you have some important critical data that you need to keep for compliance purposes for a specific amount of time, and the compliance states you have to have 2 copies of it stored someplace safe. Well, Cloud Sync Manager will take that data, make a copy of it on the East Coast, and store a second copy in the West Coast. That's our bucket replication feature. The second part of Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager is the ability to migrate data out of clouds or any S3 compliant storage into Wasabi. So if you have a multi-cloud environment, which a lot of people do these days, and you'd like to have either another copy of your data that's in AWS, Azure, or Google in a different cloud, or you just would like to migrate that data out of those clouds into Wasabi, you can use Cloud Sync Manager to make copies of your data, move it from your AWS account to your Wasabi account, and then once it's been transferred, you can delete your AWS storage and not have to pay for that anymore. So there's 2 features that Cloud Sync Manager offers. 1, bucket replication for cross-region replication purposes, and migration of data from AWS, Azure, Google, or anything that's S3 compliant to Wasabi. Dan, back to you.
think this is where I'll take over here if we're going to talk about data
Right.
breaches. No problem. So just some general information about data breaches. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're all familiar with what a data breach is. There are preventative security measures that you can take to protect yourself from data breaches. But according to recent data, 85% of breaches involve a human element, which allows malicious characters to work around security structures and exfiltrate that data. So when we're talking about data breaches, what is targeted in that? We're looking at weak credentials. I'm sure we've all been guilty of reusing the same passwords, although, auto-generated passwords are trying to help, fight against that. But then we get into stolen credentials as well. The development of advanced phishing tactics, again, this is a human element. I believe the saying is to err is human, right? So more phishing software allows for cyber criminals to pose as internal employees. So I believe we're all aware that they're just becoming more intelligent with the attacks. They're becoming more malicious, and they're becoming harder to detect. So we get into compromised assets. Cyber criminals are able to bypass regular authentication steps. That would normally protect your infrastructure from spyware. And I have spyware that's designed to stay hidden. These are the attacks that are most difficult to detect and can go undetected for long periods of time, really increasing that vulnerability and risk to you and your assets. And then we also have third-party vendors. Almost every company utilizes third-party vendors and softwares on various devices. Hackers are able to infiltrate databases, infiltrate filers, infiltrate systems to gain access through these third parties. So we do everything we can to protect our network, but we all know that there are still vulnerabilities out there, and that's why you guys are on this webinar here today to help understand how Aparavi and Wasabi together can help build you a better data strategy and security strategy. Some general statistics here. Businesses will fall victim to data breaches every 11 seconds in the United States. That's an alarming factor. I mean, we're so big now that this is the reality of things. It can take up to 280 days in some cases to identify a data breach. You can have your data accessed without you knowing for a long period of time. The cost of a data breach is continuing to grow. In the United States alone, it is 8.4 million on average. That is larger. That is almost 3 times the global average. So it's much more likely and much more costly in the United States in the current state when a data breach occurs. And 85% of all data breaches are human error, like I kind of touched on before. Humans are the biggest vulnerability that we have. We have vendors, we have software, we have firewalls in place to try and protect ourselves, but they are becoming more intelligent, more harder to detect. So we are trying to help you in this fight to build this better data strategy. And if you kind of see on this graphic here with the iceberg, Aparavi helps you tackle unstructured data. And unstructured data is generally 80% of your overall data footprint. It's a lot of different file extensions outside of your database. It's very hard to index and classify, and that's what we are here to do. Nearly half of all companies in the United States have experienced some sort of data breach, and it's happening in the United States more than any country in the world. Even cloud infrastructures are vulnerable to data breaches. 7 out of 10 infrastructures are breached within a year. And this is where Wasabi steps in, and we can help actually increase the efficiencies that you're creating with this Wasabi. We believe that if you're just moving from on-prem to cloud, or you're moving from cloud to cloud, you're just moving one problem to another problem. Aparavi gives you the insight to be able to intelligently get insight into your data, first by identifying the raw, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. Separate the fat from the cream. Now you have a better idea of your overall data footprint, a clearer picture. Now you can decide strategically, based on the value to your specific business, what needs to be moved, where it needs to be moved, and how you secure that data. And this is what we get into when we talk about, it's not if a data breach is going to happen, it's when a data breach is going to happen. So with Aparavi and Wasabi, First, with Aparavi, we help you know your data. Like I said, get into the data that has no inherent value to your company. Take action on that first. Now you have a better vision of your footprint and the value that the data creates for your business, and you can start building a strategy. Start building a secure path to the right data strategy. Secure the right data. Build a better defense. With Aparavi and Wasabi together, you are building that strategy of the future today. So this graphic kind of goes into what I've kind of encapsulated so far. First thing we're going to look at, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. Clean it up. We like to call it data cleansing to give you better insight into your overall data intelligence. Now we can start identifying PII, private information, PHI, healthcare information, dark data. We're going to have 140 built-in classifications already into our platform. So if you're looking for credit card numbers, social security numbers, we've already gotten rid of the data that has no inherent value. Now we're getting a better picture of this unstructured data footprint. Maybe there's old employee information that you're retaining. We had a customer who was storing data for 31 years on their old legacy server, and they had no idea what was in this. So I guarantee there's old private information on employees there that is at risk for a data breach. And then we start moving into the Wasabi value proposition. Now we're enabling low-cost data archival. Now we're uncovering hidden costs for replication or migration from cloud to cloud. So as you can see, with Aparavi and Wasabi, you can better manage the full life cycle of your unstructured data and really increase the efficiency and security on your overall data footprint. With that, I'm handing back to David, and we'll get into Wasabi.
Thanks, Garth. So I want to talk a little bit about the motivation to use the cloud. Obviously, if you have plenty of on-prem storage capacity and your hardware is still in, early in the depreciation cycle, you may not need to have, a cloud strategy. There's really 5 triggering events that people go through when they make that decision to go to the cloud. One is you run out of capacity, and you need to store more data, and you need an inexpensive solution to do so, and the cloud becomes an option. 2 is maybe there is some hardware failure, or the products that you're using on-prem run out of their service warranty, and the service warranty extension is too expensive, and so you have to look at an alternative. 3 is really a new project that pops up, and someone may say, well, I need to keep this data that I'm storing someplace different. And 4 and 5 tend to deal with acquisitions of other companies and mergers and just IT organization growth and all together. But if you do have on-prem storage and you're early in the depreciation cycle, you may not need to move to the cloud. But if things keep going the way they have been as far as unstructured data growth goes, most likely you're going to hit a capacity issue soon. And moving to the cloud provides a lower cost alternative than buying, installing and racking and service and supporting more hardware. Power, space, cooling, staff hours are all getting more expensive these days than less expensive. And there is some acquisition costs that are often overlooked with regards to migrating data off of one storage array onto another storage array. Often organizations are running 2 storage arrays simultaneously for a period of time as they migrate data from one to another. So the cloud in the past, I'd say 5 years, 7 years, possibly 10 for some people, has become a fantastic alternative. And I'm not saying that you should replace on-prem storage at all with a full cloud solution. I am of the mind that a hybrid cloud solution is the best for most people out there. You want to have some high performance storage, some storage on-site, on-prem that you have access to and can use for your day-to-day applications. But when you start to store data for a longer period of time, as Garth said, 30 years or even a fraction of that, moving it to the cloud is a fantastic alternative. The there's a lot that has changed in the cloud architectures since 2005 when AWS S3 was first launched. The way clouds are architected today are a lot different than they were 5 years ago. As a matter of fact, the S3 API interfaces for software have blossomed and grown. They're all over the place. And so anything that has an S3 interface can be used with the object storage for the most part. It's a fantastic solution for a lot of people. Earlier this year, Wasabi published a cloud storage index. What we did was we approached an independent market research firm out of the UK called Vance & Bourne and asked them to conduct a survey on their own of 1,000 IT decision makers who are involved in the storage decisions of their organizations. And we asked them, or Vance & Bourne asked them, dozens of questions about their cloud storage capacity growth and placement, cloud storage budget spending and growth, cloud storage billing dynamics and impact of the fees on their cloud storage solutions, and enterprise cloud data migration plans, an attitude towards multi-cloud architectures, and storage security compliance concerns that customers have of using the cloud. And we published the findings in the Cloud Storage Index. You can find it using this QR code or going to the Wasabi webpage and wasabi.com / the URL's right there. It's a long one, but it's there. We were surprised to find a lot of the organizations are increasing, the amount of data that they plan to store in the public cloud, and they plan to increase their budgets. 2023 is fiscally a tough year for a lot of folks, tough years for a lot of folks out there, but they need to increase their storage budgets in order to support cloud storage. And so therefore, the budgets for organizations are going up in the same proportions in which they plan to store their data. Now, two of the findings that I want to highlight here are related to security and cloud and cloud costs. The first one is related to security. Now, a lot has changed in the past few years. 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, one of the biggest concerns, one of the reasons why most people weren't storing their data in the cloud was because of security concerns. Since then, a lot has been done to make sure that customers and all cloud customers' data is secure. I mentioned SOC 2 and ISO 27001 compliance for data centers is critically important. That's the stepping stone to make sure that data is secure on-prem. There's compliance for HIPAA, FINRA, FERPA, GDPR, CGIS, all kinds of compliance functionality out there that cloud storage services are offering today. And if you're in the federal government, FedRAMP support is critically important. So the cloud has come a long way as a place to store data. Now, there's of the three, I think, the top responses for customers' concerns on what led them to migrate their capacity to the cloud. I have listed here: better infrastructure, resilience, and durability than can be offered on-prem. And that was not an option a few years ago. 4 nines of availability and 11 nines of durability was at the time in 2015 out of reach for the cloud. But those are entry-level stakes these days. The need to scale resources beyond what they can do on-prem. Cloud, of course, has the scalability capabilities, and then avoid costs with refreshing and purchasing new hardware. I mentioned that earlier. One of the reasons why people move to cloud is so they can avoid that new technology refresh cycle that hits every 3 to 5 years. So there's a lot of information in that cloud index on security and customers' attitudes towards using the cloud as it relates to security. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today also was the cloud storage budget. So in our findings of this report, we found that it was 48% of an organization's storage bill is made up of fees not related specifically to storage capacity. when you receive your bill from many cloud providers, there is a bill for the storage you have, and then there's also fees related to that. It's API puts and gets and egress and retrieval fees, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But 48% of a customer's storage budget is related to non-storage capacity. We'll talk about that in a moment. Of those customers that were interviewed for this report, 52% of the customers said they exceeded their budget on their cloud storage. And 3 out of the 4 top reasons for exceeding that budget are listed here in red. The first one is they incurred higher data operations fees. That's fees for replicating data between regions, for tagging objects, or for transfer related costs. The second red bar down here is related to the costs incurred for API fees and reads and writes. Those are the API requests I'll talk about more in a moment. And then the third bar is related to costs incurred for retrieval fees because the customer retrieved more data than they thought they would need. Obviously, when you put your compliance data in the cloud, you're sitting on it for a specific amount of time, so that if it's needed by the lawyers or by HR or somebody within the organization, you can access it. But if you access it, often you're going to be paying additional fees. Now, I mentioned cloud storage service. At Wasabi, our price is $6 a terabyte for storage. That's it. It's a straight $6 per terabyte per month. And we don't have fees for API requests or for egress charges or retrieval charges. Many people don't understand. Everyone's familiar with the egress charge. Egress charges are what you pay for transporting your data out of a cloud back to on-prem or back to the site in which you need it at. So, and those egress charges can range anywhere from 9 cents a gigabyte to 2 cents a gigabyte, depending on whether or not you have a direct connect or you're using the internet. Obviously, at 9 cents a gigabyte, that's $90 a terabyte. It can get expensive if you have to recover a lot of data. And so those are the egress fees that people complain about. Additionally, your API charges. Every time you put an object into a cloud, there's an API put charge associated with it. Every time you want to get a object back, not egress charge, but just get back your data, there's a get request charge associated with it. If you want to list the inventory in your cloud files or your cloud buckets, listing the inventory has an API charge associated with that. Now, the put charges, it could be half a cent per 1,000, right? But many people don't understand how much data they're actually storing, the number of objects that they're storing. It can go and easily get into the billions. Think about your average object size that you're managing now. If it's an email, if it's a PDF, if it is a call data record, often they're small size objects. They could be anywhere between 64K on the low side to 128K, medium size, maybe a megabyte size. If you have an average object size of 1 megabyte, and you have a terabyte total, that's 1 million objects that you have under management. So therefore, your API cost to put 1 million objects into a cloud can be thousands of dollars. And if you are like some of the customers that I have, it's possible you have billions of objects. Being charged to put billions of objects into the cloud is often a budget breaker. So beware of the amount of objects you have and the size of the objects that you have. Depending on which cloud provider you use, there may be multiple tiers of service. There may be a hot tier, an infrequent access tier, a frequent recovery tier, a deep archive tier. Each one of those tiers have different costs for storage, but they also have different costs for operations charges. And here's the last one for you. Some tiers will have a minimum chargeable object size. If you're putting your data on a tier with a minimum chargeable object size of 128K, which is a good size object, but your objects are 64K, you're going to pay for 128 KB size object storage. That means you're paying double the amount of storage you should because your objects are smaller than the minimum chargeable object size. There's plenty of tiers out there that have a minimum chargeable object size. So if you're looking at data that you're storing that is 64K, 32 KB, 128 KB, you should make sure that they're sitting on the right tier, or you should be using a cloud storage service that doesn't have a minimal chargeable object size and different tiers. Lastly, if you are looking at a glacier type solution or a deep archive type solution where it's going somewhere deep for a period of time, and it's going to be basically it's sitting on tape in a cloud someplace. Every object that you put in some of these glacier tiers have additional header that's added to them by the cloud service provider. You give me a 64 KB size object, and I'm going to add 8 KB that I'm going to use as a header information, metadata information to find that when you ask for it, and that's going to sit on a hot tier. And then I'm going to add another 32 KB of metadata that per object, and it's going to sit on a cold tier. So I'm adding 40, not me personally, but the other clouds will add 40 KB of storage to each object. And again, if you have millions or billions of objects on a monthly basis, you're paying for the metadata that cloud service providers use to find that data for you. So if you have, let's make this simple, 128 terabytes of data that you're storing in a deep archive type solution, I am adding to that, if their average object size is 128 KB, I'm adding another 40 KB to it. You will be paying more for the metadata on a monthly basis to store that data than you would for the original data that you're storing. So there are a lot of reasons why people will get their cloud bill at the end of the month and find out that they've exceeded their budget, and half of their bill is related to fees and not to storage. The only thing what I want to leave you with here is make sure you understand the number of objects you have and the average size of the objects you have, and you're placing them in a cloud solution that is fiscally the best place for them to be. If they need to be in a deep archive because it's really inexpensive, just be prepared that the overall metadata costs are going to be more than what you might imagine. So if you have any questions about storage service budgets and the reason for people exceeding their budgets, again, hit the cloud storage index, and they'll give you the cloud storage index from Wasabi, and Vance and Bourne will give you a fantastic overview of where people had made mistakes in the past. Before we get going much further, I just want to emphasize that data is growing. Nobody wants to delete data. There is a fear of data deletion. And I see it from where I sit. I see it from where my customers are. You want to hold on to that as long as possible because you never know when it's going to be needed. And you have to have, many cases, immediate access to that. If the lawyers or HR or somebody within the organization, or there's an audit of your HIPAA compliance or your FINRA compliance or your CGIS compliance, an audit, I know the guys who do audits, they want to see that data right away. They don't want to wait 15 hours in order to pull that back from tape. So data is growing. It's going to be, it's growing by zettabytes, and it is going to be truly difficult to manage more and more on-prem. You need to have a combination of on-prem data and cloud data storage. And so lastly, I'm going to take us right back to Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager. The Wasabi Cloud Storage, object storage, great place for you to put your data, as I said, from a compliance perspective, FINRA, FERPA, CGIS, GDPR, Motion Picture Association compliance. So compliance is critically important. 2, physical security, SOC 2, ISO 27001. You need to have sleep comfortably knowing that your cloud storage solution is secure. Some things you can do on your part related to your cloud storage and making sure that it is safe and secure is to is to make sure you use multi-factor authentication on your root account and access to your console. You'd be surprised by the number of folks out there that do not have the best security on their console. They want to make, so if you are using any app, any application will have multi-factor authentication for you to access it. That holds true for Aparavi. That holds true for your cloud storage console. Make sure that you have multi-factor authentication enabled. Make sure your account credentials, your root account users are locked up and not shared. Not everyone needs to have root account admin access. So those two are the things that you can do on your part to sleep well at night. Thirdly, make sure that you're familiar with the immutable data features and functionality of cloud storage. Cloud object storage has a immutable capability where if you are storing something in a cloud bucket, in a Wasabi cloud bucket, you have the option of turning data immutability on that bucket. Whereas anything that goes into that storage bucket is immutable for the specific amount of time that you set it for. That means that anything that, if I set my bucket immutability for 1 year, that means anything that goes into that bucket can't be deleted, it can't be encrypted, it can't be altered in any way for exactly 365 days. On that 356th day, you can delete that information. You can delete that data, or you can extend that bucket lock even further. But using immutable data in order to make sure that everything has a proper legal hold, chain of custody, and that data will hold up in a court of law under cross-examination from lawyers is critically important, and immutability helps you get there. Now, Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager allows you to keep extra copies of your data in different regions. Maybe one bucket of data can be immutable. The other bucket doesn't have to be immutable. So there's different things you can do with set policies with your Cloud Sync Manager. One of the greatest things about that is you can have different buckets on different regions, on different ends of the continent, and not have to worry about data loss. And also, you can use Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager to migrate your data out of AWS or Azure, Google, or any other object storage into Wasabi Cloud Sync, into the Wasabi Cloud Storage solution. So, look for Wasabi Storage, look for Cloud Sync Manager, and make sure you activate multi-factor authentication and use immutable object policies from your console. Dan or Garth, I'm going to throw it back over to you guys for a quick wrap up on Aparavi data management.
Yeah, thanks, David. And again, just wrapping up with Aparavi, all the policies you just put in place, it all comes down to what is the data that you're trying to move around, save, and archive off. Knowing what you have before you start moving it around, before you start replicating it, before you start making it immutable is really important to know, again, who has access to what the permissions are, what you're open up to if you're kind of looking at a data breach. So trying to clean up the data to begin with, reducing your overall footprint. Again, we ran into a client that had a copy of one particular file 67,000 times. If I were to replicate that up to the cloud, I would charge 67,000 times whatever that 128K block or 1 meg block or whatever it was. If I was just to replicate everything, then obviously be charged for all that storage that I don't need to be. So help clean up your storage before you start moving it around, before you start replicating it between various different sites. And again, tie the visibility, who has access to what, who has the ability to replicate files, who has the ability to delete files, the permissions on those folders and objects is really important. So this just helps you build a better defense strategy around your entire footprint. So knowing, again, you've got data in the cloud over here, you've got data in the cloud over here, you've got data at various different locations on-prem in your remote branch offices, as well as your production data center. Understand, where it is, who has access to it, and what you want to do with it. And again, with us, you can move the data between on-prem and cloud, between on-prem and on-prem. But then if you're trying to pull out of a particular data center or particular public cloud and move it over to Wasabi, that's really where you want to manage and leverage the Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager, because they can do it much more efficiently and at a better price point than what you're being charged from that existing private public cloud vendor. So I think it's a great match to know what you've got prior to moving it around, and then use Wasabi to move it around and leverage their cloud to store that 6 cents per terabyte. So it's pretty efficient there. With that, I think going on to questions. Garth has any closing comments?
No, I appreciate that, Dan and David, and great job of explaining the value that we both provide to our customers there. I think it's clear that we like to partner with Wasabi because we consider them best of class, and what we are both trying to do is help you save money on your data storage and help protect you from things like data breaches and attacks from malicious characters. I think what we've kind of covered here is that we both believe that a hybrid strategy is the way that you have to manage your data today. And with Aparavi and Wasabi, our goal is to help your business succeed by giving you insight into what's in your data, by helping you build a better data strategy, and helping you reduce costs. A pre-breach, Aparavi is able to scan your infrastructure, let you know what you have, build that strategy. Post-breach, we're able to allow you to know what's been compromised. We're able to allow, in the case of a breach or a ransomware attack, even if this is something that is going to be valuable to your company, or if this is something that is a non-case. But what we're allowing you to do is make better decisions with your data and ultimately save your money and help you run your business more efficiently here. So I think that covers it in general. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll try and address those as we can here. Be happy to talk to you guys for a few more minutes. Looks like go with a question here for Dan. How long does it take to install, set up the software and begin scanning with Aparavi?
Yeah, so setup and install is rather straightforward. We get a couple of virtual machines within the environment. We've got a SQL database on the back end, what we call our aggregator collector that points to the shares. Again, whether that's S3 Target, SMB Share. We also have the support for OneDrive and SharePoint. And then Azure Blob, of course. So we can scan any of those sources, and really we can be up and running in a matter of maybe an hour or two at tops. Once we get the kind of base infrastructure installed, then we point to those shares and we're off and running. Obviously, how long does it take to scan is that's a tough question with what David was talking about before of, do I have 1 billion objects in 1 terabyte, or do I have 6,000 objects in 1 terabyte? And of course, the level of scan that we're looking at varies as well. What we call our core scan just captures the top 10 metrics of access date, modified date, creation, file type, file extension, size, and then owners. And then from there, we can capture up to 77 different metadata fields doing our more advanced scan. And then, of course, again, the index and classification is beyond that. So it depends on what you're looking to accomplish. If we wanted to get that full-on index and classification, that's obviously a much more in-depth scan. What we like to do is we like to clean up the data prior to that. So we're not trying to index video files. We're not trying to index things that we're not going to care about. Let's clean it up first, clean up those redundancies, and then we'll go on into those further scans. So that's kind of industry or environment dependent for, again, how long it takes to get the scan finalized.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Looks like this would be for David. Will replicated buckets have the latest version of the user's data, David?
Yep, that's a great question. So there's 2 options here. One is versioning, and one is not versioning. I suspect most people should use versioning, but yeah, once the primary data is put in the source bucket, it is replicated directly to the source logs, and the source log tells us to make a copy of it in the other bucket, the secondary bucket. So it's just a matter of seconds before that data is moved over.
Okay. And looks like another question. does Cloud Sync? How does Cloud Sync install onto my environment? What does that process look like?
Oh, good question. So it is a web-based tool. And you can access Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager from the Wasabi Cloud console. So if our users are using Wasabi, they log into their cloud console, they can get access to the replication functionality directly in their own console. And there are no agents, there's no software to load. The nice thing about Wasabi Cloud Sync Manager is that it's end user driven. So we do not ask for your account key information. That's something that the end user controls, and the end user should not give that up to anybody else. So if you decide that you want to migrate data out of AWS and move it to Wasabi, you control your AWS keys, not Wasabi. You configure the console with your security information, and then you hit proceed, and we'll do the back end work for you on the migration piece. We don't ask for anything from a security perspective, and we don't ask you to install any software. If it's a bucket replication, you can do that on your own from the console. You set up, you go in just as you would any other day. You set up the policies and choose which region you want to have that secondary bucket in. You create that bucket, and then you identify what your source bucket's going to be, and then you can start replicating that data on your own. Our Wasabi service team doesn't see it, so it's all secure, and no one at Wasabi needs to know about the data that you're moving.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. This kind of piggybacks off that. It looks like and for Dan, how is Aparavi cloud based, or what is the installation look like if you have strict security protocol or regulations, and what kind of custom reports, or how could you build custom reports?
Sorry, I muted myself. So the Aparavi cockpit that we showed in one of the first slides, that is a SaaS-based portal. So that's what we log into to initiate all the jobs, but all the work is being done on premise for customer environments. So we don't move any of the data. We don't copy any of that up to the cloud unless you initiate that copy with us or with Wasabi. So everything is self-contained. It's a presentation layer only within the cloud. Now, once we have the data, then we can run any number of custom reports. Again, we're capturing all those different metadata fields across all the files. So we can search for every single file that this particular user owns, every single file that's a duplicate that has more than 2 copies of it, looking for anything that's larger than 1 meg that has duplicates, and being able to filter by all those different metadata fields. We can run reports based upon that. Again, we're MySQL on the back end, so we can run SQL queries against the database to look at whatever we need, or we have obviously our GUI where we built in the different filter fields and different columns we can generate for a report. We can export that to Excel. We can export that to PDF. We can get a link to the results, so you can actually upload that into like a Power BI, for example, so it auto generates and it gives you a nice bit dashboard. So various different ways of getting the reports. We do have just a quick query tab as well, where we can just do a quick, I just want to look for all the files tagged from or owned by this user. One of the unique features that we have as well is the ability to tag files after we query. So if we look for every single file that David owns, we can then select all those files, tag it as David owned, and then archive only his specific files, even though they're might be in the entire user's share. They have, we've got 50 different users. I only want to archive off David's information and the files that he owns, because he's no longer with the company. So we're going to tag those, automatically archive them with one of our data automations and our policies to copy out. So we can then leverage those custom tags to do any number of things, of doing reports against them, doing queries against them, or just leveraging for our data actions.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. So we're coming right up against an hour here. We will send you a confirmation of attending this webinar with us. You'll receive an invite to receive a personalized consultation. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know David, Dan, and myself would be happy to talk to you about your specific business and scenario to see if we can replicate the same results that we give our customers. So with that, I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Aparavi and Wasabi for joining, and I hope to talk to you guys again here in the future.
Thanks, Garth. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, David.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.